exploring how the roles we undertake in New Eden can provide transferable skills into real life. Please welcome to the stage, Exooki.
Hello, everybody. How's FanFest going?
Pretty good.
You got to ask when you get to be on the main stage, right? So, hello. My name is Exooki Z, and today we're going to be talking about real-life skill training with EVEOnline. So, if you have been playing for a while or not a while, and you're wondering, what can I be doing in EVE that's going to actually help me outside of EVE? We're going to try to answer that question today. So today, what I'm going to run through for everybody, I'm going to tell everybody a brief bit about myself, who I am, what I've done in EVE, maybe why you want to care just a little bit. I'm going to talk about what prompted the entire presentation that I'm giving. It's a question that I've been pondering and chatted with a lot of people over the past couple of years. I'm going to talk about how I gathered all the data that you're going to see used in the presentation that we're talking about. So when I say correlations or interviews, where that came from, because I only made up some of this stuff. And then I'm going to talk about what we found. So the meat of the presentation is I spent a lot of time talking. I wrote surveys. I did interviews. I used some personal experience. But what did we find? What is it that you might want to care about? What are some things I want you to think about? What are some things that you're going to go, huh? So, about me. If you are unfamiliar with me, my name is Exooki Z. I've been playing EVEOnline since 2009. I joined right after Apocrypha came out, which is why I also spent more than the first decade of my time in EVEOnline doing wormholes. So if you're thinking, that guy looks familiar, I'm frequently up on the FanFest stage talking about wormhole space, but not this time. I'm instead telling you about how EVE's making you a better person. I'm the CEO of TD Sin and have been for 14 years. Another name that you've probably at least heard of before. We're not very good, but that does mean that no matter how bad we are, you've heard of us. And while I'm here, I wanted to just briefly touch on for everybody. We have a lot of fans that talk about us on Discord servers and talk about us on Reddit. That is an S. I frequently see people misspelling our name with a B. It's an S, though, just making sure that you guys all know that. I know that keys can be tricky. I'm also the alliance leader of Scary Wormhole People, a.k.a. Waboo. You've probably heard some of my corp mates shouting our ticker around. And, oop, it's gone. Oh, it's back. And you might have seen our pretty dope logo. So that's up there, too. I was also a member of CSM 14. I'm going to touch on it in another slide or two, but that's actually one of the places that prompted a lot of this. I've met a lot of really cool people playing EVE in general, as well as my time on the CSM, and that got me thinking into a bunch of things that led to the presentation. Outside of EVE and some of the personal experience that I'll be touching on, or what I said, I think this actually helped. I'm a director of software engineering outside of EVE. I've had a very fortunate career to move up several levels quickly in software engineering management, and I attribute a good chunk of that success to things that I've learned and gotten to experience through EVE. So, moving right along, the question that started all of this. So, when I was on CSM 14 in March of 2020, a month and date year that probably some people have some icky feelings about, because that was basically the start of the pandemic. Me and a bunch of CSM 14 found ourselves at the old CCP office way down closer to the docks. Watching COVID start to unfold, actually, it was that critical week where you might remember COVID was a thing in China, and it was starting to be a thing in Italy, and it was kind of popping up everywhere. And by the end of our week-long summit here, we were flying back, watching closures and international borders getting zipped up. So they sent us home just in time. I think the United States closed their international borders like 2 days after we got back from the CSM summit. But one of the things that happens at the CSM summits is, we have a meeting with a lot of devs. That happens constantly. There was one in particular in which Hilmar came down and sat down and looked around the room and just said, "I am in a room full of superhumans." Now, first thought when that happened was I looked around and said, that's a weird thing to say. I mean, sure, I wouldn't consider myself a superhuman. I would consider some of the other CSM superhumans, and certainly some of the more CSMs that I've gotten to meet since my time on the management council. Some of them are definitely superhumans. But it prompted that thought. What did Hilmar mean? Was he right? And I began to think on it. One of the things that, as you get to know the rest of your CSM and you get to talk more and more, I realized that a lot of the CSMs on CSM 14 were pretty powerful people. We had corporate executives, we had PhDs, we had a doctor, we had people that are leaders and movers and shakers in their career field. And from my experience chatting with a lot of other CSMs besides 14, that's not uncommon. And then you begin to dig and talk to a lot of other people that are leaders in EVE themselves. They're FCs, they're alliance leaders, they're corp leaders of some of the both smallest and largest corporations, and you start to see some patterns. Now, the question that I first started with was, how much of each thing is impacting the other? I don't think anyone would be surprised if I said someone that's an executive or a leader outside of EVE is likely to come into EVE and be a leader there too. That's less interesting, and we're not going to focus on that, because I'm far more concerned with the reverse. I wanted to find out how many people played EVE, learned some things, and then carried that back to their career where they didn't have that first. So the questions we're going to dive into are, how can things that you do in EVE help you outside of it? What are those skills? How do they help? We're going to so the goal of my presentation here really is to try to give you some answers to that question. I tried to build a presentation that would be helpful and insightful to as many people as possible, because your mileage may vary. I'm not getting up here and saying, do these things, you'll get promoted. Do these things, and you'll get a really cool new job. But I think what we are going to talk about is, do these things in EVE, and you're probably learning stuff. I don't want to ruin EVE for everybody, because if you suddenly realize that you're learning things, that might make it way less fun. But the bad news is you probably already are. Maybe whether you knew it or not, you've learned something from logging in and doing things in EVE. And you've probably picked up some skills, and you might just be a better person, whether you want to admit it or not. So we're going to focus and talk about what are some of those skills, what are the ways that you can learn them, and maybe you already are, and how those skills might in fact just be something that you can leverage. So everything that we're going to talk about here today comes from three main places. I used the basis of my own personal experience and career, of course, as a foundation for figuring out where I wanted to poke into, talk to people, what are the questions I wanted to specifically find answers for. I interviewed a lot of other EVE players. I conducted well over 70 different interviews, some very formal, some less formal, with people all over different organizations, every part of space you can think of, every block, corporations. I went all over the place trying to get a nice varied background of different people. I talked to doctors, I talked to engineers, I talked to truck drivers, I talked to people that repair medical robots. There you go, Phelp. I talk to people that work in retail. I talk to people that are chefs. I talk to people that are bartenders. We tried to go everywhere, because my goal is to convince you that no matter what you actually do outside of EVE, you are learning things that are probably helpful. I had a survey. If you took it, thank you very much. We got several hundreds of people to come take a admittedly a little lengthy survey about, what do you do outside of EVE? What do you do in EVE? Tell me about both of those things. I got feedback, too many questions about some different skills. Do you think you learned something? Do you think it came back and helped you in other places? But that also helped me provide a guide on people I wanted to talk to. And the great news is I found overwhelming support suggesting that the answer is yes. Almost everyone that took my survey said in some way they'd learned something that they think they were able to bring back to their job. Sometimes it helped immensely. Sometimes they thought it helped a little, but everybody said they learned something. So what I did with all of that is we tried to look, and I tried to tailor it and correlate it to a list that might make sense outside of EVE. So I went to the Forbes 2023 Most In-Demand Skill Workforce Survey, which is intended to be universal, regardless of who you are, where you are, and what you're doing or where you work. These are skills that you're going to find helpful. Those skills are communication, leadership, teamwork, creativity, time management, adaptability, problem solving, work ethic, critical thinking, conflict management, and emotional intelligence. So we've got a pretty cool list here. I'm going to hope and assume that most people know what most of those words are, because reading you the wiki definition of every single one would be time-consuming and probably rather boring. Although the one thing I did want to touch on, simply because when I first started, this initial feedback I got was, emotional intelligence? We're EVE players, you know. Your first thought when you're thinking about EVE players might not be emotional intelligence, but I can assure you that when I asked them about it, I was able to get several people go, you know what, I do care a little bit about other people. Or, you know what, I do know how to pretend that I care about other people just a little bit. So EVE players can get those done too. Now, basing it off of my survey, the roles that we're going to touch on and I looked at, by far not an all-inclusive list, broke down into 4 main categories. We have leadership roles, your CEO, your director. Depending on the size and way that your group is organized, you might have officers or a layer of middle management. We looked at industry and logistics, which I defined mostly as people that are building things and moving them around. This logistics is specifically the moving it around part and not repping other ships. That's also useful, but probably less likely to directly correlate because running around your workplace trying to heal people might be strange. And this is not all the roles that we looked at and talked about in my survey, but for the sake of time and not having a million slides, I condensed it into the ones that had stronger correlations and I thought were going to make the most sense, but also be a little easier to explain. So we touched on people that work in solo industry, people that worked with lots of other people working on supply chain management, material coordination, market managers, people that run buyback programs. The third category is people management. There's, of course, the possibility for significant overlap between all of these, but whether it's the same person doing half the things on this list for your organization or a small army may depend on the size as well as how you've organized yourself. These are roles and functions that are focused purely on people. These are your recruiters and people that talk to people, review applications. These are people that work in onboarding. These are people that track your membership. Are they active? Are they doing enough? Are they clicking their PAP links? And these are people that do culture fit assessments. Are these the right people for our corporation? Do I want to be flying with these people? Do I want to throw them out a window? And then probably the category that most of you actually first thought about, I called it operations. These are your fleet commanders. These are people that are helping run roles supporting the fleet commander, making the fleet successful. These are people that plan the fleets. Might be the FC doing literally all these things, but sometimes these are different people, or at the very least, they're different skills. And then you have your theory crafters. You've got your people that are figuring out what are we doing, how are we going to do it, which of these modules goes on my ship. There's people that know enough to shout at your bad corp members when they die and ones that are fit terribly, terribly wrong. So the first group that we're going to look at, and for some of those, I'm going to have a slide that grabs just one, and for some of them, I'm going to have a slide that tries to condense it, all depending on what the results looked like. Now, what we found, both talking to people as well as from the survey results, was regardless of what level you're operating at as a leader in your group, chances are you're learning the same skills. The exact degrees, some leaned a little heavier and others did vary, but not enough to be worth splitting this up. So whether we're looking at CEOs, we're looking at officers, or we're looking at directors, these are people that are responsible for setting the goals and directions of your corporation and utilizing delegation and collaboration. They're going to try to make those things happen. These people had the strongest likelihood of saying that they felt that they had learned and or improved on their leadership skills, their work ethic, their problem-solving skills, and their communication skills. Probably not a huge surprise, especially the first one. If anyone's shocked that CEOs said I learned leadership skills, I've got tons of surprises for you in my presentation then if that one surprises you. But I also have a quote from someone that indicated that this is something they would define themselves on for each of these slides. We're going to touch on what the roles were, how I defined them, the skills that they correlated with, and then I've got a quote that some people saying that they're actually really getting something done. So for the people, I believe this was a CEO, EVE helped me trust myself and my skills enough to start my own business. When I look at what I've been able to deal with in EVE, the problems of my job seem like nothing. I actually really like this quote. I like all the quotes, that's why I chose them. But depending on what you do in EVE, you might actually have defined your time in EVE as your second job before. Show of hands, who else has ever thought that what they do in EVE is a second job? All right, that's a good chunk of the audience, so you guys are doing great. Keep it up. But EVE can be hard. EVE can be very hard. People in EVE can be very hard. I'm not going to keep asking everyone to raise their hands up and down. A couple of you made faces that you already said, I hate this, don't call on me again. But I think I've had more difficult people to work with in EVE than I have in my workplace, which is probably a blessing. There's certainly people that can say, oh, that is not true for where I work, and I'm sorry for you. But that's true for definitely some of my experiences in EVE. There are some rough individuals that play EVE. We might love them, but they're rough. So being able to do things in EVE hopefully helps you recognize you can probably do a lot of that in real life. It might be different, but if you can corral a bunch of people and say, guys, this is what we're doing over the next couple of months, and then work with them to get that done, chances are you could do that outside of EVE too. You might not want to, especially if you have to sit near people and smell them and things. But if you're here at FanFest, you're already smelling people, so you can do it. Rolling into our next category, we're going to have a couple slides on some industry and logistic roles. The first one that I wanted to start off with, that actually surprised me a little bit, but only until you start thinking about it, was people that do industry by themselves. If you're here at FanFest, there's a good chance that you're not a solo player. There certainly could be some out there, but most people that make it to FanFest are usually people here with groups. So this may or may not apply to you. Or maybe you're in a group, but you don't like those guys, so they don't get to touch your minerals and you're building all your stuff by yourself. Where's the tritanium? This makes collaborating with people very challenging sometimes. But people that are solo industry players, they're tackling potentially complex jobs that might include a lot of steps, that might have prerequisites, and they're usually doing this by themselves. So these people, through my interviews and discussions, identified strongly with time management skills, critical thinking, adaptability, and problem solving. These are people that need to know how to line things up to be efficient. They need to be able to figure out how to adapt on the fly because they don't have someone else to go lean on and get some of this done for them. It's you. The buck stops with you. If your reactions aren't done on time, that next job's going to sit and wait. Skills I made doing industry helped me set up ordering of medical supplies and equipment, ensuring deadlines and bottlenecks are met as far as material and fiscal inputs are concerned. I thought that was actually a pretty cool quote. I talked to someone that basically talked about how they applied their EVE industry experience to organizing and getting things done. Lots of people had feedback similar to this. There's a lot of things in real life that can be thought of as put a bunch of things together, let them do some things for a little while, get something out. Not everything can be baked down that far, and I would strongly advise against in your head applying the EVE industry UI to everything that you do, but you could if you really wanted. But people that did this and did industry by themselves were able to really learn and grow in a lot of different ways, because you've got to figure it all out and then get started. And I'm sure a lot of you would probably raise your hand that that is a definition of something you've done at your job, is figure it all out and get it started. Bouncing to another type of industry and logistics, we've got supply chain management and market management. So these are people that are working with other people. They're building capitals while someone else takes care of some of the components, maybe. They're doing reactions and doing reaction chains where other people are handling different steps of that process. These are people that are moving stuff from point A to point B. These are people that are stocking your market. They're getting stuff up on contracts. They're making sure that you guys have what you need. Primary skills that these people strongly correlated with were communication and teamwork. Not a surprise, since these are people that are working with other people. Conflict management and problem solving. And if you're wondering why conflict management, because I actually was too when it came up on the survey, and I chatted with several people, figuring out what everybody wants to do and then making sure that they're not all doing the same thing can apparently be rather challenging. If you've got several people that are helping stock your market, first off, great. The fact that it's more than one, we're off to a fantastic start. But it doesn't do you any good if they're all stocking the same thing. Because now you've got 5 people undercutting each other, trying to make sure that they're the ones selling things. And you've probably underserved your community because all the other crap that you need is not stocked. So the reason that a lot of those people chose conflict management was really a bunch of people getting into a room or a channel or voice comms and saying, I want to do this, figuring out someone's got to do something they don't want to do. There's compromise, there's resolution of some conflict, and there is hopefully an outcome where your group, your market, your whatever it is you're stocking gets what you need. Working with industry that requires multiple people requires patience and an understanding of people's capabilities and limits. Big things require coordination and working with people, and the same is true of almost all careers. So if you've ever found yourself trying to figure out how to get a bunch of people that together have all the right skills to get a job done, and you've managed to get it done, that's great. And that also is pretty agnostic of what you actually do for a living. If your experiences in school with group projects were that they're terrible and you hate people because of it, this is a good way to try to undo some of that PTSD, because most things in life require collaboration and working with other people, whether you want it to or not. As much as you want everything to be a solo venture, chances are that will not always be the case. Rolling into our third category and talking about some people management roles, the first slide that I've got here talks about cultural fit assessments and people that work in onboarding. Cultural fit assessments we defined as the person whose job it is to feel out somebody and decide if they're a good or a bad apple. This may or may not be the people doing all of the other things related to interviewing, but it is a distinct step, I thought, because looking at someone's skills and actually talking to them are two very different things. Likewise, people that identified as onboarders had a nearly identical skill profile, so that's why they're together here on the slide. If your group doesn't do onboarding, I would strongly advise trying to do onboarding. We've had other presentations at prior FanFest for sure from different groups talking about their onboarding programs, but making sure that new people that join have what they need, know what they need, and know where to go to ask questions generally has a pretty strong correlation with likelihood of longer-term membership and smooth integration into your crew. People working in these roles strongly identified with critical thinking, work ethic, emotional intelligence, told you it would come up, and conflict resolution. Mostly the cultural fit assessment, I thought, but onboarders also had it too, When you're trying to work with someone, first trying to figure out, do I want to fly with this person at all? And then, all right, we got to fly with them. How do I make sure they don't suck? You end up talking to them. It requires figuring out what do they want, what do they need, and resonating that to match what you want and what you need, or rather your group wants and your group needs. Closing that gap and being able to get everyone onto the same page is the main reason that we have emotional intelligence up here. Working and assessing fit into an organization helped me understand that oftentimes the best way to solve a problem is to avoid having it in the first place. That's a good quote of virtually everything, but in the context of this slide, that was specifically raised to me as far as keeping bad apples out of a corporation. I suspect this is a lesson that many different groups and leaders and organizations in EVE have had to learn, probably the hard way at least once. Toxic people are bad. And you might say, but I need more people. You never need people enough that you should be tolerating people that are bad. The damage that can be caused internally by someone that is negative, hard to deal with, and makes other people want to literally not play with you, might mean that when you take a step back, you realize you're literally at a net negative for letting this person be in your fleet. And recognizing that before they're in your group can be important. And that was what this quote was specifically talking about, but hopefully a lesson that you can learn both in EVE and if you're in a position to ever be doing so. I'd advise about keeping bad people out of your real-life organizations as well, because it's rarely ever worth that gamble. So we've got people management working with recruiters and applications. So these are the people that are going to sit there and go, you don't get to fly with us. These are talent acquisition. These are people that work on finding recruits, whether that's spamming in local chat, posting on Reddit, using the in-game recruiting function. You're finding people that want to join your group, and then you're talking to them, making sure they know what you're about, figuring out if they want to come join you. And then you'll interview them and review their application, all depending on what your group does, how strict your requirements are. The bar could be way up here, or maybe if they can breathe, they're joining your corp. And most groups in EVE are somewhere in between there. We can probably all think of groups on both ends of that spectrum. Most corps are definitely somewhere in the middle. But that's a very real thing. And the people that do this in EVE generally had strong critical thinking skills, strong work ethic skills, again, emotional intelligence, because their work here relies immensely on just understanding other people's wants and needs and expressing their own, and communication, because they're spending a lot of time talking to people. Work ethic, I wanted to just touch on the reason we have work ethic up here is a lot of them said, well, recruiting's a lot of work. Maybe you have deadlines or targets. We want to recruit X number of people. Maybe you have a lot of people applying to your corporation, and the people that you've got to review and talk to are piling up. These are people that just generally speaking said they know how to buckle down and get stuff done. And they know how to consistently do that to try to keep everything moving. One of the, I think, only quotes that I actually have a name attached to it. Either people left me useful quotes but didn't give me contact information, wishing to remain anonymous on my survey, or in my interviews would say, you can quote me, but leave my name off that slide. I don't know if they were worried they just didn't want to be associated with me. But I did get a couple people that said they didn't want their name up here. So I actually use these skills in real life to hire support staff and even help with selection of physicians and other critical clinical support roles. I don't know if they're here. I asked one of the Wingspan guys, and he said he didn't know. But this quote is from Nikki Akala, who works in HR for Wingspan. Another one of my surprises that's probably not a surprise. EVE's a great place to just hone and practice and leverage some of those skills that you may or may not be using outside, but it's a place where you get to sit down on a table and interview people or talk to people and find out if you like them, if they like you. I don't have a quote here, but I can tell you at least 5 of the people I spoke to specifically mentioned that they felt like interviewing people in EVE made them better at interviewing in real life on both sides of the table. Because you're sitting down and talking to someone and just figuring out, I want a job here, I want to fly with these guys, or I'm figuring out if I want them to fly with me. Maybe the word is not fly, but you do that a bunch in your job probably, especially if you work in any sort of hiring manager roles or team lead roles where you're trying to figure out people that you want on your team or you want on your company. Rolling into the last category that I had for roles set up, and starting right off with probably the role that I'm not sure which one's higher, CEO or fleet commander, probably the other role that everyone immediately thought to when I said roles in EVE. The fleet commander. I'll also note this is the only slide where I have 5 skills attributed to it because fleet commanders had such strong correlations across the board with a lot of roles that it was challenging to pick just 4. Because I think I did mention it, but these are not the only skills these roles help you with. They're just the strongest, because telling you that every skill or every role helps with every skill would be terribly unhelpful. But the definition of fleet commander that we use is these are the people that are responsible for calling out actions, directing and driving groups of people towards a common goal, and that goal might sometimes be complex. I'm sure if everyone just closes their eyes for a moment, they can hear their fleet commander shouting at them to jump or not jump, or wondering who jumped, or asking why'd someone already shoot the target and now we need to unlock and move to another one. It's every fleet. I heard several giggles. Like, it's not just, my corp's not the only one that's bad at PvP. I don't believe you if you try to tell me otherwise. But fleet commanders, they do a lot. They've got a lot of stress running on them sometimes. They've got a lot of people sitting there patiently, or hopefully patiently, actually paying attention to when they get told what to do. And they need to do a lot of thinking, and they need to do it quickly. So fleet commanders get 5 skills for critical thinking, adaptability, creativity, leadership, and teamwork. Fleet commanders need to be good at communicating too. It was a close contender to be here, because if your FC can't communicate, they're probably not doing any FCing ever again. But they need to be able to think quickly, they need to be able to make good decisions, and they need to be creative. Because sometimes you go on in and you said, this is the plan, and you take that Titan bridge and you go, oh, one D-scan lights up with what the fleet is bringing. And now you need a whole new plan. They're leaders, and they work with teams. So probably the rest of those skills aren't, well, none of the skills are probably surprises. But fleet commanders get an awful lot of experience in an awful lot of different places. My quote from an FC, fleet commanding was how I learned to build trust and reliability within my teammates. And these are skills that I've successfully carried into managing people outside of EVE. It's not a quote from me, but I probably could have written it, because I would say something very similar. I work with managing people for a living. I work on making sure they have everything they need, giving them direction where needed, and there is immense strong overlap with things I do both as a CEO and a fleet commander. I'm not our good fleet commander, though. He's someone else. Next up, I've got ops planning. Very similar to fleet commanders as far as the role breakdown goes, but I did want to call them out because they had at least one, they had a couple different differences there. And again, fleet commanders had very strong correlation across the board. I could have put all 11 skills up there, but it would have been less helpful. Ops planners are people that may or may not be the FC, but they're helping figure out what we're doing ahead of time. This might be planning just tonight's op. This might be planning the entire week. When are we hitting what? When are we going to need to follow up on timers? They're heavily involved with ensuring a group's operations run on time and move and run effectively. They've got leadership, just like the FCs did. They've got work ethic. They've got time management, and they're adaptable. Timing can be very important when it comes to planning. Most plans, at least in EVE, do have some semblance of time to them. But being able to figure out how long are things going to take, how long is getting there going to take, and oh, the wormhole's gone. Now we need a new plan. And figuring out how to adapt when your route has changed twice, because now your Titan's also dead, and you need to figure out how we're getting there differently. Planning and helping execute operations helped me build planning skills and learn attention to detail. I've been able to directly translate those skills to mapping out install jobs and ensuring proper staffing and resource allocations. So again, I thought a pretty cool quote. This person worked in construction, and in my conversation with them, they said that literally I've taken figuring out how I'm going to glass this constellation of structures and taken some of the skills I've learned from that on moving all the pieces and parts around and actually carried that back to my job. We've got theory crafting. Theory crafting is an interesting one in that I think your first thought might be, how does that apply to anything that's not figuring out how to make spaceships? But then you think on it more and realize it actually starts to make a lot of sense, especially after we touch on the quote. Maybe this applies more to some fields than others, but I got a lot of people that talked about how that overall min-maxing optimization mindset was able to be applied everywhere. These are people that build your doctrines. They figure out how to fit your ships. They might yell at you when you don't listen and fit your ship something differently. And they adjust to the game changes, both mechanics and the game meta, to ensure that whatever you're flying is as efficient as possible, keeping the price in mind. These are critical thinkers. They solve problems. They're adaptive, and they're creative. And figuring out, screen keeps dying on me. There we go. Figuring out how to min-max something and find the perceived best solution to a problem with hundreds of variables has helped me tackle similarly complicated things in my engineering career. Probably no big surprise to someone that engineering was where this quote came from, but being able to just take a couple steps back and look at the big picture with all the different parts, changes, things that need to happen, and figuring out how to navigate through that is not unique to EVE. It's not unique to EVE. It's not unique to just ship fittings. And I strongly believe that if you learn some of those skills and work and just what is the best way to put all these pieces together, it's going to work. That is a real ship fit that I have seen used by someone in my alliance, in case you're wondering where that came from. Not on the list from Forbes, but something I wanted to touch on was hard skills. The hard skills that we specifically peeked at was data collection, analysis, statistics. I got a lot of people saying that they'd picked up these skills in EVE. The first grouping, Google Docs, Microsoft Excel, Power BI, and other similar software that does data entry and processing. A lot of people we talked to actually said one of the first places they really, really used those things was in EVE. And many of them now use them in their job, even if they didn't have to, because they are now addicted to spreadsheets. Look what EVE has done to us. Almost everybody said in some fashion they used this, but the roles that had the highest likelihood of saying, yes, I used that for both my job and in my EVE job, literally every industry role, didn't matter what kind of industry you were doing, huge surprise. If you're doing industry without spreadsheets, I'm slightly concerned. Operations planners, theory crafters, and people that worked in onboarding. If you're wondering why onboarding's up there, my conversations with the people that checked that box was they basically use them to make checklists. They use them to track where people are at in their different onboarding pipelines. And they're using that to figure out who needs what. Likewise, people that learned and got involved in analyzing data and learning statistics, theory crafters, fleet commanders, ops planning, and people that worked in, again, all industry roles were likely to have gotten involved in analyzing lots of data and making some decisions based off of analytics. So, per the Forbes list, there's our 11. I attached one quick end towards the end for the hard skills. What we've done now is we've created a mapping of where am I most likely to improve my time management skills? Where am I most likely to be able to work and do some things that might help me learn and improve my creativity or my leadership or my critical thinking? I'm not going to read this entire slide, of course, but what we've got here is the 12 different skills that we touched on, along with what roles that I talked about that had the strongest correlation to them. I, of course, will again note, basically, almost every role that we looked at had some people that said they used XYZ skills in it. If you're doing anything in EVE, there's a good chance you're learning several of these. So this is not an exhaustive list or a prescriptive list, but rather this is intended to come across as a guide that says, I do some of those things. Those are the skills I'm learning and picking up on. Finally, I wanted to just touch on this with one slide just because it came up enough from conversations that I thought it would be silly not to touch on. There was already another presentation by Max Singularity this weekend that talked about relationships and friendships and networking and things that you can build and grow and learn through EVE. But two things that stood out to me that I felt were especially relevant to this conversation was people that said that those have helped them in their career. Just over 1 in 5 people that we spoke to and took the survey felt that relationships that they'd gained through EVE have actually helped them advance their career, whether that was helping them land a new job in the same field in another company, or just saying, hi, yeah, this is how I learned these skills and got promoted. Here's how you can do it too. These are not direct quotes, but rather paraphrasing of combining lots of conversations on this. But meeting someone that was further along in the same career as me helped me find advancement opportunities, summarizes what all those people gave me as feedback, as well as people actually changed career fields because of EVE, or rather because of people they met in EVE. I've been thinking about moving careers, and finding someone that already did that helped me decide to make that jump. If you're thinking, I want to know how to break into X, what's better than finding someone that already does X? So 1 in 8 people said that this has happened to them through their time playing EVE. 13%. Not most, maybe not tons, but given how many people we looked at, I thought it was relevant and interesting enough to bring it up. So that's wrapping up my presentation. We talked about me, the questions that started this, the goals of the presentation. Hopefully everyone feels like they learned something, or at least laughed once or twice at some of my bad jokes. How we gather the data, and then I drove in and talked about all the different roles and skills and how they all correlate together. So there is not time for Q&A here. We're not set up for it in the main hall. But if you have questions, comments, feedback, or want to just talk to me, I'm Exooki Z in-game. You can convo me if I'm online. You can shoot me a mail. You can find me as Exooki on Discord. And, of course, I will be around for the rest of FanFest. So always happy to talk about this with anybody else. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope that was a good use of your time. And enjoy the rest of FanFest.